is a brilliant argument, uh, put forward by no less than perhaps the most brilliant man ever to walk the face of the earth,
Mm.
Aristotle. If you
Mhm.
look at the
Mhm.
amount of philosophy and ideas that he came up with, which are still central to our debates
Sure.
today, it's astonishing.
Yeah.
Astonishing. I have a friend who's a philosophy professor who says Aristotle thought of everything.
Mm.
So very smart
Nothing
guy.
left.
That view is also sort of underlay a lot of previous economic psychology and economic
Mm.
thought,
Mhm.
and that there's a sort of formula. Contemporary psychology thoroughly rejects that view, and it does so for empirical scientific reasons. So I'm going to offer you just a fundamentally different way of
I love it.
thinking about
Yeah.
making. Your brain is a machine. It's not a computer. It's a machine.
Sure.
And it runs, it's got electronics is a big part of it, but it also has chemical reactions and electrical reactions. And so think of it as like a very big, complicated machine.
Mm.
And your behavior is an output of that machine. And your behavior is an output, is a consequence of whatever forces in your brain were the strongest at any time.
Mm.
So you have conflicts. We've all experienced these where you're like, my one part of me says, don't eat the cookie because I want to lose weight. And
Yeah.
another part of me says, eat the cookie because it's going to taste good. When you have that kind of a conflict, what determines whether you eat the cookie is not whether your long term happiness or well being or goodness is maximized by eating the cookie. There are two different biological, physical systems in your brain vying for control.
Mm.
One of them is going to be stronger than the other one. The stronger one's going to win, and that's what you're going to do.
Mm.
And it's not based on what's in your long term interest. And you have a lot of different situations that prompt different behaviors. So much of our behavior is based on habit. It's not based on what's best for us in any significant way. It's
Mm.
just what's easiest and what we do out of habit. We also evolved in group settings. And there's a theory of this that's called the social brain hypothesis. And you're nodding, you've heard about this one
Yeah. Yeah.
before. So we evolved in these group settings, and our survival was very linked to our ability to interact positively and effectively with other people.
Mm.
That's a major issue in my book, because it turns out that psychologically, your brain doesn't want to love anything that isn't a person. Your brain wants to reserve love for people.
Mm.
And so, yet we do love things. What's going on? Well, every time we love nature or we love a person, not a person, excuse me, we love a car or whatever it is that we love, it's a case of mistaken identity on the part of our brain. Our brain is thinking about that thing to some extent as if it was a person. And we can talk maybe about why your brain would do this later if you're interested. But we're very motivated around this. And we do what other people want us to do in many situations, not because we think it's going to happen, make us happier, but because there are mechanisms in our brain, just like there's a mechanism that says, eat that high calorie food, it's good for you.
Mm.
There's a mechanism that says, do what other people want. And we do it. And it depends on who the other person is. There are, as people are looking at brain science, they're finding, this is very preliminary and a little bit out of my expertise, but my understanding is they're finding actual, like a region of the brain that is constantly keeping track of hierarchy between people. And, and so are you above or below somebody else? And then if you're below them, and this shifts by situation, which
Mm.
is also fascinating. So, in a classroom, as a professor on top of the hierarchy. But outside of that classroom, somebody else, like I could have a student, right? There could be a situation where I teach people who work, if I took full-time jobs. It could well be that someone who's in my classroom working for a company hires me as a consultant.
Mm.
And when we're in the classroom, I'm the head of the hierarchy and they do what I say. But when I leave the classroom and go to their office to talk about the consulting project, they're the head of the hierarchy and do what they say. So we've got this very complicated idea of this hierarchy and who does what. and that seems to be a motivation linked to the structure of our brain,
Mm.
which is not based on any computations about what's best for us.
You know what's interesting? It makes me think. There's kind of like a fundamental, maybe philosophical, although I use that word loosely, concept here, which I think is really interesting because I think, and you could apply it to so many different things. There's this view sometimes that there is like this deeper, and you can think about it in terms of religion or what we're talking about with love and emotions and feelings and how we make decisions, where there's a view that there's this almost like transcendent space where the things that we do and the actions we take and the things we believe are driven by something deeply meaningful and outside of us, right? Whether that be religion or God in some way, or love drives us, or as we're talking about it, like there's some computation that's happening in our consciousness that says, I'm going to eat the cookie versus not eat the cookie because of this long-term reason. And there's an argument to be made for that, that some people believe. There's another argument, which I think is more what you're saying, which is that's just us explaining something that at its root is really just a machine. It's just hormones and neurons firing and all these things happening, and it plays out in a certain way. And because we have consciousness, we've looked at it and said, oh, we should tell a story about that. And let's spin this story to say that we do this thing because it makes us happy and there's goodness in it. When in reality, it's exactly like you're saying. It's just different machines or mechanisms within a machine vying against each other. And one of them is going to win for some physiological reason. And that determines our action. There's nothing more beautiful, deeper, more meaningful than that. And who knows, maybe there's a combination of those two things. But I think that's a really interesting concept. And I'm curious, and I'll bring it back to the love conversation a little bit. How do you view, like, do you, let's assume how you're explaining it is actually the true sense of it, right? As science would say, it is just the machine and the mechanics of the machine happening. Is there an opportunity though to transcend that, and with our consciousness to actually rise above that and be conscious and aware of, in this moment, you know, I have this hunger mechanism that's kicking in that's telling me to eat this cookie, but I have this other mechanism which is a motivation to have a six-pack or whatever it is, and I can actually control and say, I see what this thing is telling me, I see what this thing is telling me, I'm going to make my own decision. That's a really interesting thing to think about. Some people would hear that and be like, oh, maybe that's just, but even in that, you start to wonder, but how are you making that decision? What's telling you what's the thing that you actually care more about? And I would imagine that would come full circle back to, it's just your body. It's those machines giving you whatever has the stronger pull is telling you that's what you're going to pick. So a long-winded question here, but I'm curious what you think about that. Is there ability to transcend those mechanics of our bodies and the machine that is our brain and all that to make our own decisions, or are we always just kind of enslaved by it?